Stop right there. Before you scroll past this, before you click on something else, I need you to do one thing. Look at your last name. Just look at it. Say it out loud. Because what you are carrying in that name is not just a label your parents put on a birth certificate. It is a story. A real, documented, centuries-old story about real people who lived and worked and struggled and survived and who passed something down to you without you ever asking for it. Your surname is a time capsule. And most people walk through their entire lives without ever opening it. But today, right here on History TimeRift, we are going to open it. And what we find inside is going to completely change the way you think about who you are. This is not a dry history lesson. This is your history. And it starts with something as simple as the name on your driver's license. And real quick, if you have ever wondered where your family actually came from, if you have felt that pull toward something bigger and older than yourself, hit that subscribe button right now and ring that bell. History TimeRift drops deep history videos every single week, and you do not want to miss what is coming next. Now let us go. Here is something that most people never think about. About 1,000 years ago, most people on Earth did not have last names at all. That is not an exaggeration. Your ancestors somewhere back in medieval Europe, or ancient Asia, or across Africa probably went through most of their lives with just one name. Maybe a second name if people needed to tell them apart from someone else in the same village. The idea of a fixed, hereditary family name that gets passed from parent to child, generation after generation, that was a genuinely new invention in human history. And the way those names came into existence tells us so much about the world our ancestors lived in. So where did surnames actually start? The answer depends entirely on where your family is from. In China, family names go back further than almost anywhere else on Earth. The Chinese surname tradition is believed to stretch back nearly 4,000 years, with historical records pointing to the reign of the Yellow Emperor around 2800 BCE as the beginning of organized family naming. Names like Wang, Li, Zhong, and Liu are not just common surnames today, they are living fossils from ancient dynasties and tribal clans. If your last name is Wang, you are carrying a name that literally means king, tracing back to royal lineages from thousands of years ago. That is not a metaphor. That is documented ancestry in one of the oldest civilizations on Earth. In Europe, the story is different, and it is packed with chaos, creativity, and more than a few tax collectors. In England, the turning point came in 1066 when William the Conqueror and the Normans took over. The new rulers needed to track who owned what land and who owed what taxes. You cannot run a feudal kingdom without knowing who is who. So the Normans brought with them a tradition of hereditary surnames, and over the next 200 to 300 years, the practice slowly spread across England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. The surnames that emerged during this period almost always came from one of four places: what a person did for work, where a person lived, who their parent was, or what they looked or acted like. And knowing those four categories is like having a decoder ring for your entire family history. Let us start with occupation, because this one is absolutely loaded with history. When medieval record keepers needed to tell two men named John apart, the simplest solution was to call one of them John the Smith and the other John the Baker. Over time, the Smith stuck, and that is why Smith is the single most common surname in the entire English-speaking world today. There are over 4 million people named Smith in the United States alone. Every single one of them is, at least in theory, descended from someone who worked a forge. Who hammered iron? Who shod horses, made plows, and crafted the tools that kept medieval civilization running? Blacksmiths were not just tradesmen. They were essential figures. In many communities they were almost mythical, because fire and metal were seen as powerful forces, and your ancestors, if your name is Smith, were the people who controlled those forces. But Smith is just the beginning. Think about the name Fletcher. That comes from the old French word for arrow. A Fletcher made arrows, and in medieval England, where the longbow was the most feared military weapon on the battlefield, a skilled Fletcher was worth his weight in gold. The name Wright comes from Old English meaning craftsman or builder. A wheelwright made wheels, a shipwright built ships, a cartwright built carts. Cooper meant someone who made barrels and casks, an absolutely critical trade before refrigeration existed. Taylor was a tailor. Thatcher thatched roofs. Weaver wove cloth. Mason built with stone. And Chandler was the candle maker, one of the most important people in any medieval village, because without candles, the world went dark the moment the sun went down. What this means is remarkable. If you carry one of these occupational surnames, you are literally wearing your ancestor's job title as your identity every single day. You are introducing yourself to strangers with a word that was first attached to your family because of what they did with their hands hundreds of years ago. There is something deeply humbling about that. Now let us talk about location-based surnames, because these are a goldmine for tracing family geography and migration. When people needed to be distinguished from others with the same first name, record keepers often noted where they lived. John, who lived near the hill, became John Hill. William, who lived by the brook, became William Brook. Ford meant someone who lived near a river crossing. Wood meant someone near the forest. Marsh, moor, heath, lake, stone, dale, every one of these is a landscape feature that became a surname because someone lived close enough to it that it became their defining characteristic. But location names go even deeper. Many surnames come from specific towns and regions. The name Douglas comes from a place in Scotland in Scottish Gaelic. Dub Glass means dark stream. Blair means a flat plain. Ross means a headland or promontory. If you carry a location-based surname, the place your name references might be the exact ground your ancestors walked on every single day. And if you have never been there, you are carrying a map to your own roots without knowing it. This is where things start to get deeply personal. Because for millions of Americans whose families immigrated from other countries, that geographic connection is sometimes the only thread still tying them to where they came from. And this brings us to one of the most profound and painful chapters in the entire history of surnames, the story of what happened when people were forced to change their names, or had names assigned to them against their will. Let us talk about immigration, because the American surname story is unlike any other in the world. The United States was built by wave after wave of immigrants, and every wave brought surnames from dozens of languages, cultures, and traditions. German immigrants brought names like Müller, which means miller. Schneider means tailor. Fischer means fisherman. Bauer means farmer. The German occupational naming tradition mirrors the English one almost exactly, which tells us something fascinating, that across Europe, independent cultures arrived at nearly identical solutions to the same problem of identifying individuals within a community. Jewish immigrants who arrived in America in massive numbers in the late 1800s and early 1900s brought surnames with a deeply complex and often traumatic origin. In much of Eastern Europe, Jews had traditionally used only first names with patronymics. But in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, European governments began requiring Jewish populations to adopt fixed hereditary surnames, often for taxation purposes. In some cases, families could choose their own names. In others, corrupt officials assigned names. Sometimes they were beautiful: Goldberg meaning Gold Mountain, Rosenberg meaning Rose Mountain, Greenwald meaning Green Forest. But sometimes cruel and humiliating names were assigned deliberately as a form of anti-Semitic persecution. The history of Jewish surnames in Europe is therefore not just genealogy. It is a record of survival against systematic oppression. And when these families arrived at American immigration centers, their names often changed again, sometimes by immigration officers who could not spell or pronounce them, but more often by the immigrants themselves, who voluntarily Americanized their names to escape discrimination. Schwartz became black. Bianchi became white. Kovacs became Smith. The loss was real, and the search to recover those original names has become one of the most emotionally powerful quests in modern genealogy. Now let us spend some time on Irish and Scottish surnames, because they are among the richest and most historically charged names on earth. If you have Irish or Scottish ancestry, your surname is almost certainly a map to ancient clans, medieval kingdoms, and centuries of brutal colonial history. The prefix Mac or MC in Scottish and Irish names means son of. So MacDonald means son of Donald. MacGregor means son of Gregor. McCarthy means son of Carthage, and Carthage itself comes from an old Irish word meaning loving. So McCarthy is literally the family of the loving one. That is a beautiful thing to carry in your name without realizing it. The prefix O in Irish names is even older. It means grandson of or descendant of. A Brian means descendant of Brian. O'Neill means descendant of Niall. A Sullivan means descendant of Sweelabane, a name possibly meaning dark-eyed. These are clan names. These are the names of real ancient Irish kingdoms that existed long before England arrived on the island. And here is where history becomes genuinely heartbreaking. During the centuries of English colonization of Ireland, a process that began in the 12th century and did not truly end until the 20th, the Irish were systematically pressured, and in many cases legally forced, to drop the Gaelic elements of their names. The O and Mac prefixes were suppressed. Irish names were anglicized, translated, or simply replaced. A family named O'Cowhig became Carey. A family named MacGiola Owen became Leonard. The original names were pushed underground, surviving only in Gaelic-speaking communities where English reach was weaker. To reclaim your Gaelic name in the 19th and 20th centuries became a political act, a declaration of identity and resistance. Entire communities rebuilt their linguistic heritage around recovering those names. Here is something that History TimeRift absolutely loves: the unexpected dark stories hiding in perfectly ordinary surnames. Because some names that sound completely innocent today have origins that are anything but. Take the name Savage. Today it sounds like a compliment in some circles. But the original bearer of this name was likely someone called Savage in the medieval sense, meaning wild, living outside of normal society, on the fringes. In some cases it literally meant someone who lived in the forest beyond the settled lands. In others, it was applied to someone the community considered dangerous or uncivilized. If your name is Savage, your ancestors may have been the people their neighbors were genuinely afraid of. The name Cameron in Scottish Gaelic comes from Camsron, meaning crooked nose. Somewhere in Scottish history, an ancestor had a distinguishably bent nose and their entire family line was named after it. The name Kennedy comes from Sheen Ide, meaning ugly head. A Scottish clan was named after a leader whose head struck his contemporaries as worth documenting, and his descendants have carried that judgment for over 1,000 years. Now we need to talk about African American surnames, because this is one of the most complex and ultimately triumphant stories in all of American history. The history of black surnames in America cannot be separated from the history of slavery, and understanding it is essential to understanding what names cost and what they mean. During the era of chattel slavery in America, enslaved people were systematically stripped of their African names. Yoruba names, Igbo names, Wolof names, Akan names erased. Replaced by English names given by slaveholders. This was not incidental. It was deliberate cultural destruction designed to sever people from their identities, their communities, and their sense of self. Some enslaved people kept African names secretly within their own communities. Others created entirely new naming traditions drawing on biblical names, nature names, and names that held private personal meaning. After emancipation in 1865, formerly enslaved people faced an urgent question: what last name do I take? Some took the surnames of former enslavers, not out of loyalty, but because it was the only name recorded for them in the world's documents. Others chose names that were statements of identity: Freeman, a literal declaration of new existence. Justice. Washington, which was enormously popular because it connected to the symbol of American freedom, though that legacy carries deep complexity given Washington's own history as a slaveholder. The decision by many African Americans in the 20th century to adopt African or Arabic names, a movement deeply tied to the civil rights era, and figures like Malcolm X, who replaced his surname Little with X to represent the African family name stolen by slavery, is one of the most politically powerful chapters in the entire history of human naming. A last name is never just a last name. Let us look at this from a completely different angle, the angle of science. Because in the past 20 years, DNA testing has transformed the study of surnames from a purely archival discipline into something that intersects with biology in extraordinary ways. Studies conducted in the United Kingdom found that men who share rare surnames also tend to share Y chromosome genetic markers, meaning a surname really does, in many cases, trace back to a single founding male ancestor. The rarer the surname, the stronger the genetic connection tends to be. If your last name is something uncommon that only a few thousand people in the world carry, there is a real possibility that all of those people are genuinely descended from one individual who lived 500 to 1,000 years ago. Your surname is not just history. It is a genetic fingerprint. This is why services like Ancestry DNA and 23andMe have been so transformative. Millions of people have found DNA matches with strangers who share their surname, discovering cousins, unknown family branches, and in some cases, family secrets that had been buried for generations. The number of people who discovered through DNA testing that their family surname tells a different story than they believed, that a grandfather was not biologically connected to the line they thought, that a great-grandmother had a child from an affair, that a family was not of the ethnic background they always claimed, runs into the millions. This is not just genealogy. This is archaeology of the self. And it is changing the way people understand who they are at a fundamental level. Let us look at Hispanic and Latino surnames, because they have one of the most fascinating structures in the entire world of naming conventions. In the Spanish-speaking world, the traditional system uses not one but two surnames, the first from the father's paternal line, the second from the mother's paternal line. This means Spanish surnames carry twice the genealogical information of English ones. Both lines are preserved in every person's name. The name Morales comes from moral, meaning mulberry tree, a location name for someone who lived near mulberry trees. Hernandez means son of Hernando. Rodriguez means son of Rodrigo. But the name Cruz means cross, and in the context of Spanish colonization of the Americas, it carries religious and colonial weight, often marking the moment an indigenous ancestor was baptized and renamed within the colonial church system. A family named Cruz may be carrying in 4 letters the exact historical moment their ancestors were brought into the colonial religious system. That is extraordinary. Many Hispanic surnames in the Americas also carry indigenous origins, reflecting the Aztec, Maya, Inca, and hundreds of other native cultures that existed before European contact. Others are hybrid names created in the colonial period. The surname history of Latin America is a direct record of conquest, resistance, cultural mixing, and survival, all led into the names people carry today without always knowing why. Now here is something that blows most people's minds. Japanese surnames have a uniquely specific origin story. For most of Japanese history, only aristocrats and samurai were permitted to use hereditary family names. Ordinary commoners were not allowed to have them. This changed in 1875 after the Meiji Restoration, when the new government required all Japanese citizens to register a family name. This means that the vast majority of Japanese surnames are less than 150 years old. But the names people chose or were assigned captured a snapshot of Japan in that era. Yamamoto means base of the mountain. Tanaka means in the rice fields. Nakamura means in the middle of the village. Suzuki, the most common surname in Japan today, comes from a rice plant used in ancient harvest festivals. These names froze a moment in time are largely agrarian, rural Japan on the edge of rapid modernization, and those frozen names are now carried by over 100 million people. Here is one final thing before we bring it all together, and it is something that does not get talked about enough in the history of surnames. The religious name. Across almost every culture and language on Earth, names rooted in religious identity are among the most common and deeply held. In Arabic, Abdullah means servant of God. In Hebrew, Baruch means blessed. The Italian name De Angelis means of the angels. The Spanish name De Dios means of God. The Welsh name Evans comes from Evan, which is a form of John, which comes from the Hebrew Yohanan, meaning God is gracious. So if your last name is Evans, you are carrying through a chain of linguistic evolution stretching from ancient Hebrew through Greek and Latin and medieval Welsh, a name that means God is gracious. How many people named Evans know that? How many people have said that name 10,000 times and never once knew what they were saying? As we bring this to a close, I want to come back to something personal. Your surname has survived wars, migrations, famines, persecutions, and the relentless passage of time. It has been spoken in languages that no longer exist, written on documents that crumbled to dust, while the name itself lived on in the memories of children who grew up and passed it forward. It crossed oceans. It survived colonial violence and forced assimilation and the grinding machinery of immigration processing. And it came out the other side imperfect, maybe changed, maybe shortened or anglicized or translated, but alive. Still here. Still yours. Most people in human history knew exactly what their name meant. They knew which hill their grandfather had farmed next to, which craft their family had practiced, which clan chieftain they descended from. That knowledge was living and present. Somewhere in the process of modernity, urbanization, migration, assimilation, that knowledge went quiet for most families. Your name became just an administrative fact. Just the thing you write on forms. And that loss is real. But the tools we have today to recover that knowledge are unlike anything any previous generation has had. DNA testing connects you to living relatives across the world. Digitized historical records let you trace family trees back centuries from your own living room. Linguistic scholars have decoded thousands of surnames in dozens of languages. The information is out there, and it is waiting for you specifically. So here is what I want you to do. Go look up your surname. Not a quick Google search, really dig into it. Find out where it came from, what it originally meant, who first carried it. And then come back here and tell us in the comments. Tell us your surname and what you found. Tell us if this video opened something up for you or made you think about your name differently. Because the comments section on History TimeRift is one of the best places on the internet for exactly this reason. People come from all over the world with their history and they share it, and every single comment makes the conversation richer. And please share this video. Send it to a family member. Send it to someone who has always been curious about where they come from. Because the conversation that starts when someone discovers the real story behind their name can genuinely change the direction of a life. I have heard from people who found living relatives through surname research they had no idea existed. People who traveled to ancestral places their family names came from and stood on that ground for the very first time. That is what history does when you take it personally. That is what we do here at History TimeRift. Every single week we take the enormous sweep of human time and bring it down to you. To your name. To your blood. To your story. Hit that like button if this was worth your time. Subscribe if you want more. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And we will see you in the next one.